It's my great privilege to introduce our commencement speaker for 2019, Lauren Underwood. Congresswoman Underwood serves Illinois' 14th Congressional District and was sworn into the 116th U.S. Congress on January 3rd of this year. Congresswoman Underwood is the first woman, the first person of color, and the first millennial to represent our community in Congress. She's remarkable. She is also the youngest African American woman to serve in the United States House of Representatives. Congresswoman Underwood serves on the House Committee on Education and Labor, the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, and the House Committee on Homeland Security. She also serves on the House Democratic Steering and Policing Committee. Congresswoman Underwood is a member of the Future Forum, a group of young Democratic members of Congress committed to listening to and standing up for the next generation of Americans, the Congressional Black Caucus, the LGBT Equality Caucus. As a strong supporter of addressing the gun violence epidemic, Congresswoman Underwood is a member of the Congressional Gun Violence Prevention Taskforce. She is a graduate of the University of Michigan and Johns Hopkins University. She graduated from Nequa Valley High School and is a lifelong Girl Scout. That's right, she's got it all going on. She resides in Naperville, Illinois, and she is an amazing human being, as you can tell. Ladies and gentlemen, Lauren Underwood.
Good morning. President Magahead, boards of trustees, students, families, and distinguished guests, thank you for inviting me here to celebrate with you. I was honored to get this invitation to speak today because National Louis University is a special place. This is a place where it's acknowledged from the beginning that every single one of you took a different path to get to this moment, and where that was seen as a good thing. Each of your experiences, even while you were here, might have been very different, but now you have this day and this remarkable achievement in common. I'm sure there are more than a few of you, class of 2019 graduates, who know that 10 or 15 years ago, you may not have believed you would be here receiving this degree. Now, I can relate, because I wouldn't have believed that I'd be here either. As you can see, I'm not a typical member of Congress, and yet here we are, here together. I didn't always know how the different parts of my life would come together, or how I would draw inspiration and strength from a bunch of seemingly disconnected experiences throughout my life. But one thing I always knew, I knew that I wanted to help people. And since you chose to come to school here at National Louis University, I suspect that this might be in common with all of you. So let's start at the very beginning. When I turned 8, I was finally allowed to take swim lessons. This was a very big deal because there was a cool new wave pool that had just opened up in my hometown of Naperville, Illinois. But my mom wouldn't let my sister and me go until we had finished swimming lessons. Like all the other kids, I was nervous. And one day it was particularly bad, the day we learned how to tread water. In the pool, my heart rate accelerated, and it literally didn't slow down. And that is how I found out that I had a heart condition that causes an irregular rhythm. It's called supraventricular tachycardia. My condition is treatable. People have won Olympic medals after they've been diagnosed with the same thing. Not that I expect to anytime soon. But a condition like mine can only be managed if you have access to treatment. And you need to have access to treatment in order to get diagnosed in the first place. And because I had access to care as a kid, I grew up seeing a lot of great nurses in action around me. And so I decided that that was how I wanted to help people too. I enrolled in nursing school at the University of Michigan, where I took a seminar in policy and politics in nursing and healthcare. It was at 8 a.m. on a Monday, and I was probably the only one excited to be there at that time. But it was incredible. That class changed my life. It opened my eyes to a field called health policy, and that's where I decided to dedicate my career. I worked at the federal level to expand health coverage around the country by implementing the Affordable Care Act. And this brought a lot of things full circle for me, because the work I was doing was all about making sure Americans with pre-existing conditions like mine were guaranteed coverage that they could afford, and that they could no longer lose that coverage because they ran into a lifetime cap or made a mistake on their paperwork. I later joined President Obama's team to work on public health emergencies and disasters, like Ebola and the water crisis in Flint. It was exciting, interesting, rewarding work. But in the fall of 2016, I started to feel a little restless. I was, looking at the election a few weeks away. I was wrapping up my time in the Obama administration, and I was turning 30. I took a celebratory solo trip to South Africa and spent the 15-hour flight learning from some all-time great women. An article on Michelle Obama, a book about the beginning days of Emily's List, and a book that so fundamentally spoke to my circumstances, All the Single Ladies, from the great Rebecca Traister. I didn't know what was next for my life, but I took inspiration from the stories of these revolutionary women who defied expectations and drove progress. They didn't let traditional roles, stereotypical power structures, or our country's limited vision for women's leadership stop their quest for equality, justice, and change. Now, this would be a good time to tell you that I'm not someone that thinks that my elected representative and I need to agree on everything. I certainly don't expect everyone to agree with everything I have to say. But I do think that when our elected representatives make a promise, they should keep their word. So, in April of 2017, when I went to my Republican congressman's town hall and heard him promise to protect health care coverage for people like me with pre-existing conditions, I actually believed that he would do it. And when he went back to DC 2 weeks later and broke the promise he made to us, I was mad. More than mad. I knew I had to do something, and so I decided to run for Congress. It was a long shot, but channeling Shirley Chisholm, I also knew that I was unbought and unbossed. I knew that my community deserved better representation and better leadership in Congress, and I knew that I could deliver it. But I also knew that I'd have to convince a few people of that. Now, one thing that I've learned in this process is that when someone doesn't think that you deserve to have power, or doesn't think that you should be the one making decisions, they will let you know. One of my preliminary conversations when deciding whether to run was with a local leader who was so doubtful that our district could flip that he spent the meeting scrolling through Facebook like he needed to get an update on his Candy Crush game. Some things don't need to be said to your face for you to hear the message loud and clear. But plenty of things do get said in person and online. I was a first-time candidate, running in a district that no one thought I could win, for a seat that no woman, no person of color, or young adult had ever won before. So I heard it all. Being the first is tough. I know many of you understand. You may have been the first in your family to graduate from high school and graduate from college, the first to earn a graduate degree, a first-generation American. I was sworn in to the U.S. House of Representatives as the member of the most diverse Congress ever, with many historic firsts. We did that. Our class includes the 2 youngest women ever to serve, the first Muslim women, the first Native American women, the first member of Congress with South American descent, the first female physician, the first women from Iowa, the first Latinas from Texas, the first LGBT members from New Hampshire and Minnesota, and me. We are a bunch of barrier breakers. Many of us have never held elected office before, but we each have each other's backs, and we're setting the agenda, and we're having fun while we're doing it. This is important to remember. Anytime you step into a situation that's not tailor-made for you, or you try to change a system or an institution, please remember to own what makes you different. More often than not, these differences are an advantage. Anytime you try to do something you're told can't be done, or go somewhere someone thinks that you don't belong, or you're not good enough to be there, remember to follow the lead of Shirley Chisholm, a personal hero of mine who was the first Black woman elected to Congress and a pioneer on Capitol Hill. She said that sometimes when you're not given a seat at the table, you have to bring your own folding chair. And this may feel counterintuitive, because when we hear that we're not good enough or we don't belong, we're conditioned to either do whatever it takes to fit in, or we give up altogether. But that's an impulse that we have to resist, because assimilating or retreating don't often leave room for leading. They don't provide an opportunity to make transformative change. And this type of leadership is something that takes real courage to provide in an institution, in a community, and certainly in Congress. During my campaign, we had to connect with hundreds of thousands of voters across 7 counties here in Northern Illinois. It was quite a challenge. About a year ago, we began training volunteers to canvass or travel door to door to talk with their neighbors about the upcoming election. But many volunteers were nervous, not necessarily about talking with strangers, but about talking with their own neighbors. Now, you remember what that first Thanksgiving was like after the 2016 election. People couldn't even talk with their relatives over the holidays because of raw feelings stemming from a hyper-partisan election season. So, to help our volunteers get comfortable talking with their friends, their family, and their neighbors about politics again, we gave one central piece of advice: own your cul-de-sac. You see, in communities like mine, all the action happens in our subdivisions, on these wonderful cul-de-sacs where neighbors gather for block parties in the summer, and children huddle together, and the moms enjoy a morning cup of coffee while waiting for the school bus to pull up during the school year. We told our volunteers that no one knew their neighbors better. I mean, after living next door to somebody for 10 or 20 years, all volunteers were uniquely suited to share their own personal stories related to healthcare or student loans, or while climate change was important to them. Our volunteers were uniquely qualified to discuss the issues central to the election in the context of what was going on in their community. Owning their cul-de-sac required courage, and folks stepped up big time. I often find inspiration for my work in strange places. A couple months ago, I stumbled on Brené Brown's Netflix special about courage, and it was great. You guys should really watch it. In one of Brené's books, she writes that owning our stories can be hard, but not nearly as difficult as spending our lives running from them. What I've learned from this experience is that it doesn't matter whether we're owning our stories of triumph, of struggle, perseverance, or strength. The work required to bravely reconcile with ourselves and stand confidently and courageously in our truth can unlock an inner power which allows us to achieve more, connect with others, and even win elections. We are all here today because people before us found the courage to own their stories, learn the tough lessons of their lives, and drive transformational change. In the 1950s in Alabama, my grandma Ann found her inner power as a teacher in a small rural town. She and my grandfather experienced injustice every day, from segregated water fountains in restaurants to limited professional opportunities at under-resourced, colored-only schools. Despite threats of violence, Grandma Ann told her story and marched for justice, equality, and full civil rights with some of the leading voices of the civil rights movement. In the 1980s, my other grandmother was horrified as her Cleveland, Ohio neighborhood was consumed by violence, fueled by the rise of crack cocaine. She organized and secured resources for a safe space, a community center, which allowed safe activities and athletics as an alternative to using and hustling. And that became a light in a very dark time and an anchor for the neighborhood. In the next generation, my mom took a risk and became the first in her family to graduate from college, creating new opportunities for me and my sister. And then it was my turn to bring my own folding chair by running for Congress. But it didn't end there. During our new member orientation shortly after Election Day, we were briefed on Congress's rules around sexual harassment. As I learned about the rules, I found there was a little room for improvement. So before I was even sworn in, I drafted changes to prohibit sexual relationships between members of Congress and their committee staff, and to prohibit the use of non-disclosure agreements to silence sexual assault survivors and witnesses. And I pushed for these changes. And guess what? They were voted into effect on my very first day in Congress. That was a change that was long overdue, and all it took to make it happen was one new person with one new perspective to notice a problem and to fix it. But to get to the point where you have the power to fix the problems you see, you may have to insert yourself into the process, taking a risk and putting yourself out there in a bold way. Whether you're starting a business, applying for a job, submitting something you wrote for publication, or running for office yourself. And doing that takes courage. As the youngest Black woman ever elected to the Congress, and a millennial currently working my way through the new avalanche of baby shower invitations, it may have seemed obvious to work on maternal mortality. But the truth is, I was inspired by the story of an old friend. I met Dr. Shalon Irving during graduate school at Johns Hopkins. She was working on her Master's of Public Health at the time, and after graduation, she became a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Public Health Service Commission Corps and an epidemiologist at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. She served our country by working to investigate and eliminate health disparities. In 2017, just as I was serving in the last few days of the Obama administration, Shalon gave birth to her beautiful daughter, Soleil. And 3 weeks after that, she collapsed and passed away from complications from high blood pressure related to her pregnancy. She was just 36 years old. Shalon's death was a shocking wake-up call for me, and a reminder of how devastating and pervasive the disparities are that women of color face in our healthcare system today. So much so that even a federal employee with a PhD and access to world-class care could lose her own life because of them. So after I was sworn in, I knew I had to do something to address our country's alarming maternal mortality rates. Shalon's story inspired me to work with a colleague, Congresswoman Alma Adams, to form a new Black Maternal Health Caucus to tackle these disparities head-on. A once obscure issue is now receiving the bipartisan attention and presidential campaign promises that suggest that solutions are on the horizon and more babies will grow up with their moms. And this is precisely how real change always starts, with someone finding the courage to tell their own story and owning all of its parts. I took a big risk by deciding to tell my story as a candidate running for office, giving up my job, my savings, my time with family and friends, knowing that there was a pretty good chance it would all end in heartbreak. But owning who I am and what I've experienced was key to our campaign's success. People didn't vote for me because I was the Democrat. They voted for me because of the story and perspective they knew that I would bring in representing them in Washington. In my district, people of all ages and races and political persuasions live with pre-existing conditions like I do, and they depend on their health care not getting taken away. All across the country, many of my now colleagues saw the same thing. Owning the parts of my story that made me feel different, that certain people thought should make me feel shame, was actually what helped me connect and build the trust with voters that we needed to win. Whether or not we want to acknowledge it, telling our stories is an act of courage, and it's a political act. At some point, chances are pretty good that each of you will challenge someone else's beliefs without even trying, by living your life and by being yourself. At some point, your lived experience might be exactly what's needed to prove a false narrative wrong, or it might turn out to be the perfect rebuttal for someone's bad argument. Eventually, your perspective, gained through your life experience, might help you see a problem no one else sees. Or your story might just turn out to have the light that needs to be shed on a problem for us to finally see how to fix it. There is a political power in all of our stories, and it's up to all of us to embrace it by finding the courage to tell them. Just think of all the political power contained in the stories of how you got here today. Maybe you're the first person in your family to earn a degree, or your education was interrupted at some point by events beyond your control, or delayed by financial hurdles it took for you to dig deep in order to overcome. Maybe you had to borrow money that you'll now have to pay back, or struggle to find health insurance or childcare that you could afford while you were in school. Maybe you earned your degree sleep deprived from juggling classes with multiple jobs. Yes, yes. But guess what? You did that. You did that. Or maybe you were sleep deprived thanks to a long daily commute or after taking care of an elderly parent. But whatever it was that you overcame to get to this moment, you can know this for sure. Your experience has given you insight into a higher education system that's broken, and it has empowered you to do something to fix it. There are 1,670 of you graduating today, 1,670 individual stories. That's a lot of political power. Please, don't waste it. There are so many forces actively working against us right now to keep us from telling our powerful stories, people who literally want to silence us. And so we must tell these stories in ways that use their power for good. Not all of you will do this by running for office, but if you feel so compelled, you should. We need more social scientists and social workers, teachers and small business owners, healthcare experts and skilled communicators in Congress. But we also need more people engaged as citizens, voting and knocking on doors, volunteering on and running campaigns, serving on library boards and city councils, showing up to town halls, and hint, hint, calling their members of Congress. When you leave here with your diploma today, you will find new opportunities and new doors that your education has opened into spaces that your voice has never been heard. Today, I ask you to own your powerful personal story as you walk through those doors. Find the courage to rise to any occasion to use that story for good. And always remember, you can bring your own folding chair if you have to. Congratulations, and thank you.